some fun and finish some work on our beautiful Capitol complex. I think in visiting with our staff and with those on the executive branch side, we thought it was important to get going on this effort in case there are recommendations that we need to make to the governor and or to the management council on the LSO side. And of course, if anything involves anything regarding the budget, we need to have that ready to go in the fall. And so getting started here in July with just kind of a refresher today more than anything, I thought was really, really important. Something that I think would be helpful to anyone tuning in and to all of us who serve on this subcommittee would be kind of an introduction. So that would help me too, to know who is in the room. And so Ryan, if you wouldn't mind coordinating that and pointing to the folks and we can get started introducing each other real quickly. Let's go around the room and around the Zoom video and see who's here.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Ryan Frost. I'm with LSO, and anybody who wishes to speak can just activate their microphone and the camera will find them.
Thank you, Ryan.
Well, I'm going to say I'm former Senator Kurt Meyer because a lot of people still call me Senator. So, and it's great to be working with you again, Bill, really, truly. And I'm your treasurer and glad to be here and to help put the finishing touches on this process and make it and try to complete it.
Thank you, Treasurer Meyer. And yes, you will always be Senator to me, and good to see you, Kurt. Thank you.
My name is Christy Racinas. I'm serving as the state auditor, and I'm very, very excited to be here in that role, but also in my role as the mother of 2 elementary age children that will hopefully benefit from this project.
Auditor Racinas, it's great to see you, and sorry all that I couldn't be there in person today, but great to have you, Auditor Racinas. Thank you very much.
I think that leaves me, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jillian Balo, Wyoming State Superintendent. And of course, this project is so exciting to see it come to fruition. And I have butterflies in my stomach just thinking about this work kicking off as a committee. I want to just give a shout out to Wendy Madsen with LSO for all of the work that she's done, not just on this project, and bringing us to the point where we can meet and do some of this planning work and see it come to fruition, but also on the entire Capitol complex and the Capitol project, and just always having a vision and knowing, personally that this part of the Capitol has been a commitment that some days felt real and some days felt pretty far away for Wendy and for all of us. My goal, my dream is that every student in Wyoming comes and visits the Capitol at least twice during their K-12 career via a formal visit with their school. Once in elementary school to learn about the 3 branches of government and take advantage of the Judicial Learning Center and this experience to be, and once in high school to really dig in on the work of state government and on the great things that we do and the ways that we work together to make important decisions regarding the future of Wyoming. So this is much, much more than a project. This is setting some pathways for students across Wyoming that I hope every single student will be able to take advantage of during their school career. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Superintendent Balo, thank you. It's great to have you on this subcommittee. Really sitting here this morning, thinking, literally looking back up the river to the days when I was on the Appropriations Committee, and we started all of these conversations, and really fun to look back on that. And of course, you were in on the beginning, encouraging us to do whatever we can on the education front. it's just kind of fun to come full circle and come back to this arena where I think it's really going to be hopefully an enjoyable experience for us to help make these recommendations. So thank you, Superintendent. Great to have you here. Who else? My understanding, everyone, thank you for those introductory remarks. And my understanding is that we have Kevin Rambler with the State Museum. Is Kevin in the room, or is he joining us via Zoom?
That's that. Good morning, Senator. Kevin Rambler. I'm the director of the State Museum. I'm really excited to be involved with this. I work with Wendy and a lot of these other folks on helping with the opening, and nice to see this continuing.
Well, Kevin, it was great to see you a little over a month ago. Great tour at your facility. Glad you're here today to offer any perspective. And I also understand Paula Smith is with Superintendent Balo's Department of Education. Is Paula with us today too?
Yes, I sure am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very
Okay.
excited to join you guys today. Again, I'm Paula Smith, and I am with the Department of Education and supporting Jillian in this mission. And I just am so excited to be a part of this, also representing the students of Wyoming. So thank you for having me.
Paula, thank you for that. It's good to have you alongside. Also, I just want to make sure we get introductions from anyone else in the room. I understand that maybe Diane Schober are you in the room, Diane? If so, welcome.
And Mr. Chairman, Diane says she'll come up when she's ready to present, but she's in the back of the room right now.
No problem. It's good to have Diane alongside. And Sarah, we'll hear from you a little bit later. I think hopefully that kind of covers us on the introductory front. Superintendent, I understand, is joining us from the center part of the state, north central, way up in the Bighorn Basin. I've got to hit the road and get to Montana tonight, way up in Helena. And so that's why we've chosen this Zoom format. Appreciate everyone's patience with that. We had a representative who is off to another state. He may not be able to join us today anyway, but anyway, welcome. We do have a first order of business that we need to take care of, folks, is to name a co-chair from our executive branch.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
I would entertain any motions. Yes. Treasurer Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, it would indeed be my pleasure to nominate the superintendent, Jillian Balo, as the co-chair. Jillian has the fire and the spirit to make this process, I think, successful, and we all enjoy her organizational skills, and I'm sure she'll be a great co-chair and a great partner to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that nomination. I'm not going to call for a second. This is a small enough subcommittee. Are there any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed. All in favor of Treasurer Meyer's motion, please say aye or show a hand.
Aye.
Aye.
And congratulations, Superintendent Balo. I look forward to co-chairing this subcommittee with you.
Thank you for your confidence.
Wonderful. Okay, troops, let's jump right into some presentations that I think Wendy is prepared to make today. Superintendent Balo, very good thoughts with regard to all the work that Wendy's done through the months leading up to now, and look forward to your presentation. Wendy, do you want to take it away on just a review of legislation at this point?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank Superintendent Balo for those remarks. There's so many people that have been involved in this, and I'm borderline giddy this morning because it's Really nice to start seeing some of the activity that'll bring this building to life. But before I get going, and it relates to the legislation, I'd also like to introduce Suzanne Norton with the State Construction Department, with the Construction Management Division. She was instrumental as we went through this entire capital project, and she will be co-staffing the legislation. States not only about your membership, but also that this committee is co-staffed by the Legislative Service Office and the Construction Management Division. Your recommendations will come ultimately through an interior designer who will, an exhibit designer who will work with you, and those recommendations will be made to the Management Council and SBC with final plan approval by the State Building Commission. So I'd like, before I get started on the background of what work was done by the Oversight Committee, if Suzanne might say just a few words about her background and role in legislation as the fiscal and contracting agent for this particular project.
Wendy, thank you for that. And Suzanne, certainly didn't mean to miss you on the front end of everything, not being able to see all of who was there, but obviously the work we do is going to come through you and your troops over at Construction Management. So take it away with some
Thank you, Mr.
comment
Chairman.
for it.
No worries at all. Again, my name is Suzanne Norton. I am an architect licensed in a couple of states, but not in Wyoming. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more background that you may not be aware of. When the Wyoming State Capitol happens to be the capital that I didn't grow up in Wyoming, but it happens to be the capital that my elementary school came to tour to learn about government. And I vividly remember my tour back in the 4th or 5th grade, where we toured the Capitol shortly after the last renovation. And I remember touring room 302, where they had just taken out some partitions and a false ceiling to take that from a divided, chopped up room into the meeting room that did serve the state of Wyoming for quite a few years, while some of that previous work might have been a little bit misguided in terms of the integrity of the building. It still was a good service to the state of Wyoming. And I do think that the fact that I remember that was part of my decision that I had made by the age of 12 to become an architect. And so that said, I went to a program in Kansas and eventually became an architect. But my first job out of school was at a museum exhibit design firm called ESA Design. And I've worked on in various capacities for different architects in that firm. The Negro League Baseball Museum at 17th and Vine in Kansas City, a couple of different halls of fame, the Greyhound Hall of Fame in Abilene, Kansas, the Eisenhower Presidential Museum in Abilene, Kansas. And then here at the state, some of my first projects were working closely with Diane Schober and her organization and board on the Northeast Wyoming Welcome Center and then the Southeast Wyoming Welcome Center. And then we also touched a little bit on the summit, doing some work there. So it's really exciting to see all of that background work come to serve in this role. And then also working, as staff to the Capitol Square project, almost 10 years now, 2012, 9 years, learning a lot about, construction, contracting, state procedure, but also a lot about government in that process too, nuances that, you can't learn except on the job.
Suzanne, thank you for that. Sure, I'm glad to have you alongside to help shepherd this work, and appreciate those thoughts. Wendy, back to you, and take it away on some review, just to kind of refresh all of our memories with regard to legislation and where we sit today.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think you can see from the staff introductions, as well as Ryan Frost, who has a history background and did internship at the American Heritage Center. You have a team for staff on this one. And I think we've pretty much covered the legislative requirements that ultimately this will be reported out to State Building Commission. And then Suzanne will get more into the process for selection of an interpretive exhibit firm shortly. I did want to just mention I think everybody generally has an understanding of what we're talking about when we refer to interpretive exhibits. But for those of you who've been to Gateway Center and University of Wyoming, the new Judicial Learning Center over at the Supreme Court, the State Museum, Southeast Wyoming Welcome Center, those are all great examples of exhibits here in Wyoming. And we are looking at the possibility of doing a tour for our next meeting in advance of hiring an interpretive designer just to get your juices flowing. That is the major portion of this legislation is coming up with that exhibit design. However, there's a secondary portion, which is also wayfinding. And this Capitol Square project included only code required signage. And so anyone who's been down in the extension or up through the Hirschler building navigating that, it really is kind of a mystery which hallway you go down where you will end up. So the legislation also included provisions for a wayfinding design and fabrication and installation as part of this project. And in talking with Diane and Sarah and Suzanne, it makes sense that all of that is wrapped in through the work of the interpretive designer. And we'll see some of those, the concepts of what wayfinding is and what good wayfinding is at future meetings as well. So that covers the legislation. I want to briefly give you a background on the work that was done in 2015 by the Capitol Rehabilitation and Restoration Oversight Group. At that time, ground had not been broken on this project yet. Everybody had moved out of the building. Design was being finalized, and there was a realization that the piece that was really missing from all the design to date was the piece that Superintendent Balow talked about, you know, who are our audiences when they come to this building? And there was a real focus on the oversight group for school visits, 4th grade through 12th grade. School visits, as well as Wyoming citizens, tourists, Capitol aficionados. And so there was a desire to make sure that the infrastructure was in place as part of the design documents to make sure that power and data were in the right locations. So that work had to be done very early on. You all received as part of your meeting materials, and they're on the committee's website, very lengthy, about 145-page conceptual design document. Diane Schober reminded me the other day that it's important to remember that's a starting point because we're 6 years out from that. But the legislation indicates that that design document is what will guide the work of this committee. And part of that is to make sure that we don't suddenly have a completely different idea about turning perhaps a room like this into an interpretive center that would require a great deal of channeling into brick masonry walls. And so that conceptual design basically provides some directions for flow of visitors. It provides for the types of audiences that the oversight group was hoping to meet. And so that will become a blueprint for your work forward, but it certainly does need to be reviewed. It includes, as I mentioned, the audiences covered. There was a great deal of work that Paula was involved in with the Department of Education and Superintendent Balow with making sure that when teachers come here, that it's a good visit and that it meets their the standards that they're required to meet to make it worth their time out of the classroom. It included a number of interviews with teachers who'd been to the Capitol and what they were looking for. So it provides a nice blueprint there. It also provided for the area covered. And I think this is a really important piece of this committee's work is sometimes when people think of exhibits, they think of a small room and you go into it and it has some different options. This exhibit plan is extensive. It covers everything from the time you get to the grounds and what are called wayside stations to coming in through the extension into a new visitor center, which currently sits empty, which was envisioned to have the more highly interactive exhibits, to the Student Learning Center, which will essentially be a classroom for students, and it has a lot of technology in that room, all the way through the extension itself and up through the 4 floors of the Capitol building with more what was called static exhibits that are not high-tech type of exhibits, but do more passive interpretation with the concept of mobile hotspots and that type of thing. So it is really a capital square interpretive plan. And that is the reason when you see some of the cost estimates that we'll talk about, why it is the time that it takes, as well as the funding that was listed in 2015. That's the reason for it, is it covers a really broad area. It also included brand standards. Those brand standards were developed in conjunction with Evergreen Architectural Arts, who were the historic paint and plaster specialists on this project, to make sure that any of the colors on exhibits that are done really don't compete with the architecture of the Capitol, but complement it. There were some changes in 2015. It turned out a lot more was left to be found about this Capitol. So the Trump Loy paint had not been found when those when those brand standards were developed. That might be something with the interpretive designer you as a committee want to revisit there. And there's a number of other things on the project that changed. At that time, there was still a plan for a lobby between the two Hirschler buildings. So you'll see in the schematic design plan that it shows a staircase up to the Hirschler building. So there's a number of things that will need to be updated and refreshed. And most importantly, your vision as policymakers included in what you would like to see for content. And that work will happen with the interpretive designer.
Wendy,
Mr. Chairman, yes?
sorry to interrupt, but can I just pause you for a moment to refresh my memory with regard to the paint issue that you brought up, and how that may affect design standards? Can you clarify that for me?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I wouldn't say that it would affect design standards from the standpoint of the paint colors themselves. Those were already pretty well established. But the entire Trump Loy motif that you see in all the corridors of the Capitol, that determination was made by the oversight group, I don't think until 2017. And so in the schematic design documents that you see, you'll see what was considered the 1917 period of significance. And that showed more of that Wheaton shaft, I believe that's called. So there just might be, I bring that one up just as one of those many little things that are the reason why these schematic design documents are a starting point. They're not the final direction on where this work may take you.
Okay, thank you very much. Please proceed.
You bet. The next piece of information, and this is on the summary document I provided to you, is about the budget and the timeline. And Suzanne will get into timeline for RFP work in just a minute, but the budget was estimated to be about $4 million. The Joint Appropriations Committee this past year in the CapCon bill appropriated $2 million. So the goal in visiting with Representative Nicholas was he believes that is to kick off design, and the Joint Appropriations Committee would like, if not a solid number, at least a ROM cost number by the time budget hearings start in December or January. We know based on past experience that CMD and tourism have had that we cannot get to fabrication documents by that point, but the exhibit designer should be able to give you a pretty good cost estimate by the time we get to budget hearings. The overall timeline for the project listed by the original exhibit designer was a 20-month project. And I think that's important too. This takes time to develop a vision, to develop content. Kevin Ramler's been involved extensively in how long it takes to develop the exhibits themselves if you want to have them done well. So I think it's also important, when members appropriate money, it's, where is it? Where's the work? But it's important to understand that there is quite a bit of work to be done. There's also quite a bit of work to be done regarding how this actually works operationally. And the schematic design touched upon operational costs and staffing costs and long-term maintenance costs. There is also going to be a need to look at how this all works interbranch. through a governance provision. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure this actually is a good experience and it's well run. There's collateral materials such as tour booklets that will need to be reformatted and redeveloped based on the work that you do, as well as a website for tour groups coming on visits. So I take any questions, and otherwise I'll turn it over to Suzanne and then Diane for details about how interpretive designer selection works, as well as how this all just works in real life.
Superintendent Belo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wendy, I just have maybe a tangential question on ongoing costs, but is there a vision for whether or not this would be staffed, or would it be self-guided where a teacher might learn sort of the ins and outs either via virtual training before they go into the Capitol so that they could lead students on that? Or would we use the existing LSO staff? What does the FTE picture look like regarding this project?
Superintendent Belo, that is a fantastic question. And I think that will become more obvious as you work through this process. The schematic design discussed the idea of both self-guided tours as well as guided tours, as well as a much more robust student experience, which could include teaching of lesson plans in that classroom, the flow of being able to have different students come through. The Judicial Learning Center was not completed in 2015. It was just going through construction, but it certainly touched upon student experiences when they come to the Capitol, also at the Judicial Learning Center and the State Museum. So I think it is a great place for this committee to start having those discussions. As you know, the governance legislation that has a role for both Management Council and SBC is kind of stalled out, which a lot of things did during COVID. And it's exciting to now look at this building being open. And I think that potential for what you would all like to see as policymakers in this building would dictate what type of FTE requirements would go forth in the future.
Follow up.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman, one more note on that. The Student Learning Center does have really robust capabilities for remote participation. And Paula and I have had some discussions about that. Districts have access to Zoom. And so I think it's also important to recognize that there can be a remote component to this work as well.
So committee, any further questions of Wendy before we go on? Treasurer Meyer?
Yeah, a couple of things there. You know, we have a judicial center there, and I think part of the educational process when somebody comes to the Capitol, school ed age, young and your high school kids, is that something about the constitutional offices and maybe a little more, I think, some perspective in that, because they'll get a good perspective of the legislative process just because of the nature of the Capitol and of the governor's office, because the governor is here. But I think that we need to look at the constitutional, the Constitution in itself, something that's actually dedicated to the constitutional officers, because that is kind of the glue that holds the whole government together. And so I want to make sure that we don't leave that on the back burner, so to speak. And I'm not sure what area of the Capitol that would be. Then I think, yeah, it's a few years ago, I was touring a museum in Nashville, I believe, and you were able to have a interactive type of a program. When you walked to a different museum, it automatically uploaded and told you what that one little 10 by 10 or 15-foot square, part of the museum was about. And I'm assuming that the technology is getting a lot more involved. And so from that perspective, I hope that when we look at the technology, we'll look at it, the upgradability of it, and the implementation, and as far as in the general museum or other marketplace, so we understand that it's really going to be a robust platform. And so that's, I think, having a better understanding about that technology, I think, would be interesting to me. So, but again, and not leaving the Constitution behind and the whole, aspect of separations of powers and all of those type of things when because this is almost like a living government class when somebody comes here. And I'll also say that I think that former Senator Tony Ross would be a good resource for some of this stuff that we should at some time invite him into the process, just from the aspect that he was a diehard supporter of that auditorium down there, and so I'd like to make sure that Tony gets involved somehow.
Treasurer Meyer, thank you for those points, and we will certainly carry those forward and throughout this meeting and on into the fall, frankly. And committee, before I forget this thought, I did want to share with Wendy, and would be interested in any comments that Wendy might have, you or Suzanne, even Diane, with regard to getting to a point late in the fall where we can present adequately to the governor and to the Appropriations Committee information about where we want this to go. And I know Treasurer Meyer and I have both served on that Appropriations Committee, and that can be that's a tough bar. We need to be able to get at least to a stage where those two groups would be comfortable with what we're suggesting if it involves budget. And so, Wendy, do you have any thoughts in that regard? Can we get to a level where we can, it feels like we've got to address some budget in this upcoming session, do we not?
Mr. Chairman, this might be a good time to turn the discussion over to Suzanne and Diane about what the process actually looks like and what type of comfort level we could have with budget figures by that point. You do have $2 million going forward right now. That certainly did not envision fabrication. So I guess the timeline coinciding with the work of appropriations and where the interior designer ends up, I would certainly defer to Diane and Suzanne and their expertise in this area.
Thank you, Wendy. Before we do that, I apologize for jumping in there. Any other questions, committee, before we go to Suzanne? Okay, Suzanne, look forward to any thoughts you have with regard to timeframes and going in and through the fall and into the new session, and take it away.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We had a quick call the other day where we revisited some of the work we've done on previous projects, some of the different delivery methods that we've used, and we even the 2015 work, the timing of it coincides quite closely to our current calendar, where we issued the RFP on July 13th. The responses were due about a month later, and then some of the preliminary work was due just before budget hearings in about 90 days after that. We, as a staffing group, we think that it would be best to go into this. We would recommend that we decide to hire it as a design build type delivery method, where it's assumed that the same designers will be the same team that is the fabrication, in lieu of having a design team that then we hire a separate contractor who then has to come on board and learn the ins and outs. It's a much smoother and more integrated delivery method, and will result in a better product, also much more efficient. We also brainstormed on the tour that we recommend that you all take, and I think the construction management division would be more than happy to coordinate a common transportation in a van from Motor Pool or something like that to travel to Laramie and then the various locations here in Cheyenne. I would say that we've learned a lot in this past year with the pandemic in meeting remotely, so that should help some efficiency. when we were working in the early days of the Capitol Square project, getting everyone to be able to attend on a day was difficult, but that's getting more and more easy with being able to do a lot of this work remotely. So well, I would urge the board to jump in and let's get a schedule of regular meetings here shortly so that we can commit to keeping our timeline so that we can have the best information going forward into the next session. And with that, I will turn it over to Diane for more of the vision and expertise that she brings to us.
Good morning, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman and members of the committee.
Good morning, Diane. Good to see you. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all of you. This is really exciting for us because the Capitol, this building in and of itself is a destination. And it certainly is so important for the residents of Wyoming, but another audience that this building serves are all of the visitors who come into the state every year. Prior to the renovation, this was the most highly visited man-made structure in the state of Wyoming. We have a lot of visitation to our beautiful natural assets, but this was certainly the most visited of any man-made. And the building has a lot of significance that are of interest to people, not only across the United States, but from around the world. And as we look at how we want to tell the story here, there will be I think, a lot of commonality in what will work for students and the education and the learning center, because in many ways, when we think about storytelling to visitors and others, you sometimes have to simplify it down to that kind of intriguing and inspirational messaging. When we were working, we opened up the Northeast Wyoming Welcome Center in that building opened in July of 2010. That building was built, ready to go, and then we did the RFP for an interpretive designer, fabricator, and installer. And Suzanne worked with us on that particular building, and it's beautiful, it's fabulous, but we ran into many challenges sometimes we were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Maybe the windows weren't in the appropriate place for the kind of lighting that we needed for different exhibit plans. And so we used that knowledge and that learning when we opened up the Southeast Wyoming Welcome Center, which that building opened in September of 2012. And prior to all of that, we had, with the architect and the designer and construction management, we had already hired an interpretive designer, fabricator, installer to work directly with them. And that's why the work that has been done in the 2015 and then the updated schematic that you already have in place is going to be a great efficiency in moving forward, because there's already a plan there that allowed for this kind of interpretive exhibit. The timeline, I mean, it can be aggressive. We've done some very aggressive timelines on our welcome centers, and certainly excited about where this can take the Capitol here. I would just add a couple of things when we think about it, and Wendy referenced it. Technology changes, how people consume their information changes over time, and it happens rapidly. And so what was designed and planned on 5-6 years ago may not be as relevant today. It doesn't mean that would be a vast deviation, but those are the kind of things when we talk about maybe an update and a refresh of this plan, is to see where those components are, not only in just the physical structure of the building, but even in how people take in their information. I am really hoping that as we look at wayfinding, and we're looking at this as a continuous Capitol Square interpretive plan, because when you think about, you want that ta-da, I have arrived. And that is when you get here to the ground. So you start your experience long before you come into the Capitol. And we just want to be sure that, we're doing that. And then from those of us in the visitor service industry, to your point, Co-Chairman Balo, is the visitor service is really about engaging with guests and whether it's students, educators, the traveling public. And so, we know that staffing a welcome center and talking to our visitors really does impact their ability to stay longer, spend more money in Wyoming. We know that that personal interaction, we have studies and data on it from our Wyoming Welcome Centers. And so I would hope that as we go through this and we evaluate it, that we would seriously look at a long-term plan for some kind of staffing so that we can maximize the impact of what this building is on a statewide basis. And so those would be, my comments. Those are brief. I could go on for hours about how excited I am and where we get to go with this, or hopefully get to go. But, the band is back together. Wendy and Suzanne and all of us, we've been working on this project for quite some time. So we're happy to be back in the saddle again and moving forward, and happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Director Schober, thank you. And boy, I share your enthusiasm. I'm just honored to be asked to come back and join you all and go on this journey that should be a lot of fun. And thank you, Ms. Norton, for your comments as well. I would just remind of the challenge that I think, by a certain date, I think we should have in the back of our minds that we need to be able to present to our governor and to the leadership of the Appropriations Committee at least a framework, particularly if we find that we're going to have to progress with a little bit more budget than what has already been put in place. So I come back to that just knowing that we're going to have some benchmarks along the way. But committee, any questions for Ms. Norton, Director Schober?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I think this
Go ahead,
goes.
Treasurer Meyer. You bet.
Yeah, I think this goes probably to anybody that wants to answer, but I think Suzanne, to start with, you're talking about a design build structure as far as implementation. I'm curious as to how the technology selection, which Ms. Schober was opining about, as far as trying to identify that and how that would interact with the design build bidding process, because I would hate to put something out on a design build bid, but not have the specificity as far as the components of the technology that we're going to move forward with, because I could see getting a low design bid price, but somebody saying, well, these specifications mean that I can use QuickBooks rather than a huge, I'm using that type of a technology, something that's off the shelf rather than something that's actually what we necessarily envisioned. And so that's to me, RFPs and writing those is the most important part of this whole process, so we don't have anything fall through the cracks, because vendors will promise everything, but if it's not on paper and exactly what we want, we're going to end up with something that we didn't envision. And so I'm just trying to figure out how that design build integrates with the RFP process and the technology thing, and what we can do to make sure that we don't have anything fall through the cracks.
Thank you, Treasurer. Ms. Norton, comments?
Mr. Chairman, Treasurer Meyer, very good points. And I think that we still have quite a bit of brainstorming to do. And I think Diane and Wendy might have some really good comments. Technology does change quite a bit. There may be different stages that we consider as far as pre-construction or pre-design kind of services. And then we get to a point of what all is included, but we will have to be very thorough in the RFP writing and the qualification selection. Diane, I think we'll have a lot to add about the expertise of her experience in working with the type of services that exhibit designers offer.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead, Director Schober.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Treasurer Meyer. When we did both of the Northeast and the Southeast, we wrote into that RFP very extensive needs of consumer accessibility. And then we also challenged the designers to bring forth solutions based on the most current technology. And so that was part of that process of the RFP. One other thing that in the RFP, we did not base it just on price. We had a whole point system. So we broke it down into a series of categories about their capabilities, their history, other examples and other projects that they had completed before, and their ability to bring relevant technology to the project. So there is a series of things that we considered in that. I think I am not a technology expert, but I also know that I need to lean on people and experts who are in this realm. And, just looking at other similar projects through other capitals, I think there's a lot of easy reference points there too. QR codes were a thing 10 years ago, 12 years ago, then they went away. And in 2020, QR codes made a resurgence back into the world. And so, even things like that, like if we were doing this plan wouldn't have had anything to do with QR codes, but now they're back up. And so we'll just have to see where the relevance of the technology is and the ability to remain nimble over time. So that's the other piece too. What's relevant today is not going to be the same in 10 years from now. And so that'll be an important part of your ongoing plans of how we sustain this and maintain it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Treasurer Meyer. Follow up.
I guess I kind of look at our job in part as kind of scoping so we can what size is. But to your point of being nimble, I agree, 1,000%, Diane, that it needs to be nimble, because what we think today and what we think the size of the scope of this project is going to be different the day after tomorrow. And we need to have that flexibility built into the technology so we can actually, make sure that we continue to be relevant, and the dollars spent today aren't something that we have to re-spend 5 years from now. So, Mr. Chairman, I think those are the only questions and I guess comments that I have at this time.
Thank you, Treasurer. Appreciate that, and really glad to have Ms. Norton and Director Schober and folks like that alongside. Good comments. Co-Chairman Balo, do you have any questions or thoughts before we move on through the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that opportunity, and I appreciate the treasurer's remarks as well as Suzanne and Diane. I'm really enjoying the different areas of expertise and perspectives that are coming at this, because of course our overarching vision is education, which is obviously my wheelhouse. And so maybe just to paint another quick picture around this, you might have noticed lately that we're having a national and state conversation about civics education and have a lot of work to do. But I want to remind the committee and those attending the meeting that that's not anything new. A lot of us in this room and outside of this room have been very interested in ensuring that our kids have access to a great civics education. And in Wyoming, we have such a unique opportunity to not only teach that in the classroom, but to give students the opportunity to experience that by way of visiting our Capitol virtually, in person, and virtually and in person, I will say, not or in person. But, just again, to kind of paint that overall picture around this, when our students are learning about civics and able to apply what they're learning in real life, like through a visit to the Capitol, they're more likely to vote and discuss politics at home. They're more likely to volunteer and work in their community. And they're more confident in their ability to speak with local, state, and national leaders about the issues that affect them. I'm not making this up. This is what the research shows. And so our work, I know we won't lose sight of this, but our work is so much more profound than kind of getting from point A to point B and spending the money and putting kiosks in place and setting this space up. It's really about engendering a whole group of students for years and years to come and sort of ushering them into a new era of more engaged citizens and more informed citizens. So I know I share this sort of passion with many of you in this room, but I appreciate that we can dig into the details and really get to this work. And I'll continue, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, just reminding us of that overarching goal that we all share. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. And Auditor Racines, I would love any perspective or if you have any questions. I want to make sure that we don't miss your thoughts this morning on this.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm good for right now, but don't worry, I'll speak up if I need to.
Thank you. Always appreciate that, Auditor. Thank you. And Wendy, I want to come back to you. We've kind of jumped all the way through, really touched on all three of the topics on our agenda. For those taking a look at that, want to make sure that we have touched on everything that you intended, Wendy, with regard to the overview, particularly if Sarah has anything that she would like to add. But let's go back to you, Wendy, and you can pick this up and get us back on track. How about that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I think we're actually sailing right through this agenda. And I know some of you actually have to be out of here earlier, so we kept to our word. But I would we have Kevin Ramler here. Sarah Needles could not make it today, but Kevin's the interim director of the State Museum. And I think his thoughts on exhibit design and his experiences are important too. I would also like to mention that Edie Troutwine, Auditor Racines's deputy, was heavily involved in the design of the Interpretive Center over at the Judicial Learning Center, and I think is going to offer us a great resource based on her experiences. And one thing I completely neglected to mention that is really important part of this project, and your exhibit designer will lead you through this, but also the superintendent and Paula have great access to special education resources, meeting the ADA for not only mobility issues, but visual and hard of hearing issues will also be part of this project. So I neglected to mention that. It was briefly touched upon in schematic design, and Paula had been involved in that, but there are resources in Department of Ed, as well as your exhibit designers will have that background. And so I'd, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I think Kevin might have some insights for you as well to share before you as a committee talk about vision going forward and next steps with RFP development.
Thank you, Wendy, for that reminder with regard to ADA and all of the issues with special ed, and really appreciate that. But Kevin, thanks for being here this morning. Look forward to your comments. Take it away.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just echo a lot of what the rest of the team here has said. And in particular, Treasurer Meyer, your concerns with technology. I mean, one of the amazing things with how technology has changed since even this 2015, there's a lot more options. A lot of it's gotten much cheaper. And so that touchscreen technology can be incorporated from these really small, tablets like we use in the museum, static touchscreen computers, to the more sophisticated multi-touch tables. I'm sure there were some of those included in here. I will say in the museum, our experience is that stuff does require more maintenance than just obviously a graphic panel, an object in a case. So it is something to be aware of, that not only does it need to be updated, but things that move, things that you interact with break. And so that's something to be aware of. However, from what we've observed in a lot of studies within the museum field show, when people are engaging in a multimodal way of learning, so they're not just reading, they're looking at things, they're listening to things, they're interacting kinesthetically with their hands to manipulate objects, whether digital or real, they do take away our learning objectives a lot more with that multimodal form of learning. So I think that's an important consideration. Even though in some ways it does make it a little bit more difficult looking at the long term, the technology does have to be updated. And so I think it's in those documents that graphics might be good for 20 years, but the technology probably does have to be revisited about every 5 years or so. And that's pretty much how we address things in the museum.
So, Kevin, thank you for that. And once again, I just wanted to reiterate, really enjoyed the visit with you when our committee was fortunate enough to have that opportunity, and appreciate your thoughts this morning. Any questions for Kevin from the committee? Okay, thank you very much. Any other points of discussion regarding vision for the project? Anything with regard to the legislation or the overview that we've touched on this morning? I appreciate that background from all of those who have spoken. That puts us on a pretty good foundation to kind of look forward now. So that's where I'd like to go with our agenda, is just a discussion about where we might want to go. Any thoughts before we also go to any public comment? I want to provide that opportunity. Members of the committee, go ahead, Treasurer Meyer.
Yeah, now just to make sure we're really talking about the Capitol complex as far as wayfinding and the whole process. It's just not the building, I'm assuming, and so that goes over to the museum and Supreme Court and everything. And I didn't know the size the size and scope is whether or not we're gonna, there's walkways involved or other things like that, or rest areas or different, the whole basic, process, or what your guys' thoughts are and what your envisions are, because I haven't reviewed the plans, and I think that might be a good part for me is, it's like, send me some links to what those plans are, so it's all in one spot, so I don't have to search or have my staff search. So we kind of see where you guys are jumping off from. Necessarily, I'd like to hope that we can look at a fresh look on this because those plans were developed several years ago, probably a lot of good things in them, but as technology and different things change, and maybe an update in what's available for new technology, because I'm certainly not aware of what's out in the marketplace. I might be able to look up and see what's the best car on the internet, but the best wayfinding and the best other stuff, that where to find those things are just not readily available. But the tools that we need to make good decisions, if there's a way to give us easy access to those, in an electronic format, I'd appreciate it.
Treasurer Meyer, thank you. As always, some good points. I would say that having served on a task force with the governor not long ago, and it was really all about the Capitol Square. And going into this meeting, I guess in my mind, it has always been that this wayfinding effort and everything that we will be up to is not just confined to the Capitol building. I think it, in my opinion, it would be to the Capitol Square. Any comments from other committee members on that? Okay. Ryan, I want to go to you and ask, Wendy, did you have a thought?
I might make one note on what the legislation specifies for the boundaries of this project, which are the Capitol proper, the Capitol grounds for exhibits, the extension, and then for wayfinding, the Hirschler building and the extension. With that said, the schematic design did reference the State Museum. In fact, it has a lengthy discussion on whether or not there should have been a kiosk or a little store in the Capitol. And the discussion became that really we want to push folks after they visit the Capitol to the State Museum. So I think it certainly would be appropriate that there would be wayfinding to get you from the Capitol to the museum, and certainly Judicial Learning Center connection. But if it got broader than that, it likely leads into, and I defer to Suzanne on this, SBC does have a master planning process underway. So it might be that this committee would make recommendations to SBC regarding the need for that larger campus wayfinding. But I defer to Suzanne on her thoughts on that as well.
Thank you, Wendy. Suzanne, any thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be a great stepping off point to broaden the work of this committee to make recommendations to SBC. And I think it's, possible that we'll have enough information to maybe make it a target to, have an initial conversation with the master plan committee that should be having some meetings here shortly. But then also possibly between now and the January SBC meeting. I think there's some opportunity for that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Ryan, do we have anyone with us this morning who wishes to testify or has public comment?
Chairman Landon, there is nobody in the attendee waiting room online, and I don't see anybody else in the audience or in the hallway. So I don't think we have any public comment.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I wanted to make sure that we covered that. We are to the point in our agenda committee regarding future meeting dates. And I feel some urgency. I think that we really probably need to come right back together again soon. Soon meaning perhaps in about a month. I talked with Wendy about that. Madam Co-Chair, you and I have not had an opportunity to visit yet regarding that. But I even asked Ryan for you to check into some things in case we wanted to visit the University of Wyoming. For example, maybe you could get us started on this meeting date discussion, Ryan, with anything that you found out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have reached out to the the University of Wyoming Gateway Center, and still waiting to iron out some details and identify some potential dates to meet there in the latter half of August, about a month from now. So still waiting to iron out those details. As soon as we identify a date, Mr. Chairman, I will get with Co-Chairwoman Balo's scheduler and make sure that that works for her and her staff, and then everybody else, and we'll get a date set for August and move forward.
Ryan, thank you for that. And Madam Co-Chairman, I think obviously we get very busy at the end of August. So as challenging as that is, perhaps you and I can work with Wendy and Ryan and come up with a date. Does that kind of meet with what you think ought to happen at this point? Seems like we need to get back together again and get moving.
Mr. Co-Chair, I agree wholeheartedly, and this is a priority for all of us and made much easier when we have the Zoom capability if needed. I would also just encourage in between now and then any members who have not visited the Judicial Learning Center, take an opportunity to just go through that, reach out to me, to Wendy, to Suzanne, to any of the speakers to visit a little bit more about any aspects of the project that maybe are not captured in the report. Although the report is amazingly thorough and just gives such great background, but just really would encourage members to prepare and formulate their own visions for the upcoming meeting by maybe embarking on a couple of those activities.
Thank you, Superintendent. I think for this next meeting committee, what I would I think benefit from is the opportunity for just some revisits to some of the technology centers that we've referenced, and great points made by everyone this morning with regard to technology kind of being that's where I've got a lot to learn, and I'll be listening very carefully to all of you. And I think starting next month, hopefully we can gather together and get a good look at some examples and really put the accelerator down. So Wendy, any thoughts? Suzanne, any thoughts with regard to that meeting date? Okay, I think what we'll do
Chairman.
then. uh,
Mr.
who is
Chairman,
that?
Suzanne
Oh,
Norton, sorry.
Absolutely. Go ahead,
if-
Suzanne.
If we would like to suggest potentially some, recurring meeting dates, the interval that we think we'd like to meet, I think that would be a great idea. And I think that, while it's certainly possible for everyone to just visit the local interpretive centers independently, I think for anyone who would be available, I think it would be great if we could all go together to discuss certain aspects that some people might notice one thing, some people might notice others. So the synergy of this group would benefit from visiting together. I'd be happy to coordinate one of the vans from Motor Pool to go over to Laramie together, and also out to the Southeast Wyoming Welcome Center, if that would work out. But the recurring meetings, I think, would be a great idea to pencil in, and then staff can work to firm those up for everyone. And then I wanted to loop back and mention to Treasurer Meyer, we can certainly discuss with each of you to see what kind of common, the committee had on the website, the LSO office has a spot for information. But maybe we create on the executive branch side, Google Drive would work. I don't know if that works equally well across the branches of government, but to compile things like the reports, research that's gathered from other capitals, other visitor centers, photographs that we might have from the work on the Capitol Square project and other Capitol visits, things like that. We can put those all in a common spot so that they can be reviewed by the committee and staff.
Suzanne, all of that is very helpful. Thank you for that. I have a question. If we were to meet monthly, for example, is that going to be enough to get us the information we need to be helpful to you? What's your sense of what the fall looks like for our subcommittee? Every month is that going to be adequate to get some work done and maybe visit some?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be a good starting point. I think maybe in the fall, it might look like, in order to confirm some of the RFP work and the selection, we might want to, at one of those monthly meetings, have one a couple of weeks later. So maybe a couple of times in the fall, it might end up being every couple of weeks, but then revert back to a monthly. I don't know what everyone else's sense might be, but hopefully, again, that the remote capability to join and discuss things will help make that a lot easier.
Thank you for that. Suzanne, a follow-up question that I had, are there some state capitals out there who are out ahead of us? For example, one to the south are they out ahead of us with regard to technology and wayfinding?
Mr. Chairman, in the trips that we took for the Capitol Square project, which included Kansas, Idaho, Montana, and then in the summer of 2018, there was a subcommittee that worked on some planning for a new governor's residence. We visited every capital in those locations also, which included the Utah Capitol, Nevada, North Dakota, South Dakota. I don't know, there are quite a few capitals that we've been to, and I have quite a few photographs, but I would say Idaho, while it wasn't very technology rich, they definitely had their vision of what the content, they had 3 focuses, whether it was the history of Idaho, which maybe the museum covers more, that we won't get into that much detail on, how Idaho government is organized. And I don't recall off the top of my head what their other focus was. Past that research, which also occurred in the summer of 2015, I'm not sure about any other capitals, but I think that other staff members might be checking in with NCSL and other groups to see what other capitals are doing.
Okay, thank you for
Mr.
that.
Chairman.
Go ahead, Wendy.
we will contact NCSL and do an update on what we have from 2015 regarding these types of exhibits in other state capitals. But having visited a number of them, I think it is safe to say that when your work's done, if it comes to fruition at the level envisioned in the schematic design, as well as with the Judicial Learning Center and the resources at the State Museum, I think you could be safe to say that you would offer the most robust civic education experience in a state capital in the country. So we'll get you that information, but it already, from what we've seen from schematic design, is this vision would be more extensive than what we've seen in other state capitals.
I love hearing that. Thank you, Wendy. Having not been on those trips, we will simply lean back on those who have been. I have this sense, committee, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to pull together in less than a month. Frankly, all of our schedules are just so jammed up until, so my thought would be, Ryan and Wendy, to maybe work with Suzanne and others and see if we can't get that meeting between August 16th and maybe August 25th, somewhere in that time frame. We're going to have to dodge legislative meetings. I know that Superintendent Balo, I know you get very busy that time of year. And so anyway, that to me, that's the next target point. And then at that meeting, we can establish that every 2-week time frame that Suzanne suggested, if we think that would be beneficial. How does that sound? Any thoughts?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please go ahead.
So this is in regards to that, and also a question for Wendy and Suzanne. I get the impression that having the designer on board is going to be key to really being able to put some numbers together and update everything and really know what we're looking at and what we're trying to report on. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, you would like to present to the governor this fall. So to be able to have some of those updates ready to do that, I think that design build team or company needs to be identified as soon as possible. And it sounds like the RFP process, as Treasurer Meyer pointed out, needs to be very carefully put together and reviewed. And there's a lot of time in that. So I guess my question for the two of you would be, how much of this can be worked on in between meetings and behind the scenes? And what is kind of the staff's purview to be able to do that?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Smith, that is a really good question and was going to lead me into a request for a motion from the committee. The next step for this committee would be if you'd go ahead and allow staff to start engaging in the development of that RFP. We've already shared fairly extensively. We have a number of RFPs already developed for previous projects, as well as the schematic design for this project. So the good news is I think we have a pretty good sense of boilerplate and the specialized language that is needed. So with your permission as a committee, we would like to go ahead and get that finalized. And then obviously that document has to be out on the street for respondents for a while. And that's the time that we thought it would be good to keep the process moving forward for all of you to go ahead and tour, start talking about things that you like. And then we'll have the interpretive designer on board to facilitate that process with you. So there may be some workshop meetings with the designer that might be a little more intensive of your time. Then at some point that designer will go away and develop plans for you to review. So there might be some more intense times as we go through the fall and some less intense times. One more piece on our deadline is JAC will hold its first budget hearings in mid-December. That, based on my discussions with Representative Nicholas, would probably be our goal for starting to have those informal conversations with the governor, members of appropriations informally, as well as the remainder of SBC and some management council members, with the plan to have fairly solid budget numbers by the January budget hearings in advance of the February session.
Wendy, thank you for all of that. And I appreciate you reminding that we do kind of have that December time frame to think about with regard to appropriations. My mind was thinking the end of October to make sure that we include the executive branch, the governor. Obviously, I want to make sure he's looped in all the way, and I know that our electeds will do that. But yeah, I think by December, hopefully we can give our colleagues in both branches a pretty good idea of what we think we need to accomplish. I have a question regarding the RFP. If we, and we'll take care of the motion here in a minute, but Wendy, in your discussions with Diane and Suzanne, how long is that going to take? If we go ahead and get that out on the street, how long does that have to be open? When can we have somebody on board?
Mr. Chairman, I would think that we would hope to have the RFP developed in a couple of weeks, hopefully approved for issuing in August. And then it would need to be on the street for at least 30 days.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Treasurer Meyer.
I think we're getting the cart ahead of the horse if we're going to do an RFP before this committee offers a scoping document. And I think that the superintendent, would probably lead that scoping document as far as the educational part. Because to me, you have to have the scoping first before you have the RFP, or you're asking for things that necessarily we don't have a clear direction on. And so you're going 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So, I guess that's essentially how our office handles our RFPs, is that we first get an outline about what we want to accomplish, and then the RFP fills in the details. If we start with the details, then we might get lost in the woods. And some of the things that the superintendent are near to her heart may not be in the RFP, but they would be in the scoping document, and we have to fill in the details from there. So it's just the process. I think we can get a scoping document or that outline put together fairly quick. Or if staff has an outline or scoping document, then we can start with that and fill in the broad brush strokes, and they can work on the details. That's just my suggestion, but whatever you guys want to do, however you want to handle it, I'm fine with that. The other thing I think that we look at is that we necessarily, I think we don't have a leader in capitals that we're going to be the best as far as wayfinding. I think of places I can get lost in, like a major university, I could get lost on their campus. So I think you might find some good analogies about how they handle, freshman orientation, about how you get around a campus. And that's kind of how a tourist would hit our Capitol Complex campus, and how would you get them from point A to point Z?
Treasurer Breyer, thank you. Regarding the scoping document, I just wonder if, given all the work over the last 5 or 6 years, if we aren't setting pretty well on that front. But I'm looking at the screen at the co-chairman, and would be interested in any thoughts. So Wendy or others, Madam Co-Chairman?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I wonder if maybe at our next meeting, just a truncation of the documents that exist. It seems to me that maybe the issue is that we have a really complete picture, but it exists across several documents and several projects. And so I wonder if sort of a truncation of those documents presented as a scope wouldn't be adequate. And Mr. Treasurer, I'm not sure if, I guess I would ask what information should be included in the scoping document that you envision, and is that something that exists? I'll ask this of staff then, does that exist, and could it be could it be truncated into a single document or a single presentation?
Well, Madam Chair,
Go ahead,
Mr.
Treasurer.
Madam Co-Chairman, I think you're right that there's probably a lot of that stuff is out there, but it's necessarily not in one place. And the things that I want to make sure that don't get lost in the RFP is the contents and that. And then I think look at what we're actually trying to accomplish. And I think some great points were made today. And one of the ones that I really took to heart is something that Susan said about what, basically instilled the courage in her to be an architect, and that's really what I think at the end of the day is what we're trying to do is offer that experience that's going to, spark people's minds into some type of an action. And so, I don't want to get lost in the weeds so much, but I think that we do need to look at the details, and an RFP looks at the details. So an overall direction, and if we have that and you guys have that already and you feel comfortable with doing an RFP, I'd kind of like to see where you're starting as far as what your scope is. And then that gives us an idea about whether or not there's areas that we think need to be added to that go into the RFP. An RFP is really detailed, and you can get lost in the weeds of an RFP sometimes compared to the big picture.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Treasurer. And my fear is you can also get lost in some bureaucracy here too. And I want to be careful that we land on a time frame that really works. And so, Wendy, I'm going to come to you and Suzanne with any thoughts you would have, maybe Diane as well, regarding scope, and could that be developed in a way that we could review? The committee could certainly review this before our next meeting. I hate to hold off all the way to the meeting before a decision is made whether or not to go with an RFP, given the fact that we've got to have it out there for 30 days. We're looking toward the end of September before we can have someone on. So go ahead with any thoughts you guys have.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to Diane here in a minute, who's facilitated a number of these with exhibit designers, but I think some terminology might help here. The RFP will be simply to get a qualified exhibit designer who also has the ability to execute on fabrication and installation on board. It will be your exhibit designer who would facilitate that scope development with you in the content development and your vision to create design development documents and then fabrication documents. And Diane and Suzanne both have experience with this that they can walk you through, but really we as your staff can provide you some background, but we don't have that skill set to facilitate that process with you any further until you get a designer on board. And Diane can weigh in some more there.
That's really helpful, Wendy. Thank you. Take it away, Diane.
Well, thank you. And, these are all the things that we go through. We start thinking of, we're trying to cover the 180-degree landscape of all of the things that we want to include. And the beauty of hiring someone is this is their profession, and they understand how to take all of our thoughts and questions and start to distill them down into a workable process, timeline, steps. And the good news is that we don't have to have everything completely defined and determined, because you want that freedom of what could be exposed through the designer coming in and leading us through this process. We worked with a company called Toxie McMillan out of San Antonio, Texas. They were the successful respondents to the RFP that we did for both the Northeast and the Southeast Wyoming Welcome Center. They were former Disney Imagineers, and so came with a high pedigree of interpretation, storytelling, and engaging with visitors. As we said, the Northeast Center was backwards, but with the Southeast Center, what was great about that is they met with a variety of different stakeholder groups, as well as our internal construction management, the Office of Tourism, and some other leaders within government, but they went out to really talk to other end users, like so instead of us creating it, like what is the visitor want? What is something else that we would be looking at and weighing in on? And it was, it was interesting. Our gut, for the most part, was right on, but how they helped us bring that to life and then bring in other perspectives was really, really beneficial. So I think to your point, Mr. Treasurer, it's a lot, and we want to be able to be sure that we're doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people with the dollars that we have. But I think if we can trust in the process of what these designers will bring to us, you're going to see that these things that, you want to be sure that we're considering and addressing, and other things too, that, the rest of the committee have brought forth, that will happen in due process with this, how we set this up with the RFP. And then when the designer gets on board, that's really where the meat of the work starts to happen.
Thank you, Director Schober. Really appreciate that. That helps me a lot. Madam Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wonder if, what I'm hearing is some really important work that needs to coalesce, and that the designer is really at the apex of that. So we have these documents that need to be pulled together, that need to be truncated into sort of a singular scope, if you will. And the treasurer, I appreciate so much talking a little bit more about vision. There's some general information about education vision, audiences that we want to focus on, etc. Again, a designer at the apex of that can help us shore that up and bring some comprehension to that. So, Mr. Chairman, as co-chair, I just would advocate that maybe at this time, the most important next step that we can take is bringing a designer on board to really help us with that vision and determine what documents we need to pull together to guide our work.
I appreciate that, Madam Co-Chairman. Having served on several recalibrations in our education process, that's exactly what happened. You would bring on those consultants, those designers, and they help to pull things together. And so I think it would be, at least from my standpoint, appropriate for our committee to allow our staff to move forward with that RFP process. But that's just where I'm coming from. I'm going to entertain a motion on that front in a moment. I want to make sure that there aren't any other comments in this regard. So anything else, committee? Okay, I would.
Now, the RFP we're talking about is the designer. It's not an RFP for the design builder, or is that what we're looking at?
Treasurer Meyer, let's go back to Wendy or Suzanne. Would you like to field that one?
Mr. Chairman, Treasurer Meyer, it would be an RFP that we would make clear that it would be an intent for a design builder, with the vision being an initial step. I think, and we can get you the documents that we use for the Southeast Wyoming Welcome Center to use as a starting point. And then we also have inquiries into other facilities and would rely on what the museum has done in some of their planning work recently. But it wouldn't necessarily guarantee that it would go forward with fabrication with whoever gets it. I think there was a window in there for, we come up with our design and where we're going with the intent to fabricate with the same designer. But I'm pretty sure that document had, just need to get my hands and my head back into it, windows of opportunity to change path if necessary.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Suzanne, for that. Committee, I would entertain that motion to formalize our approval to allow our staff to move forward on the RFP process.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, it's been moved, and no second is necessary. All in favor of that motion, please show a hand or say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, that motion has passed. And so to our staff members, that gives the green light for you to proceed on that front. And if you would keep us posted throughout, we would be grateful for that, including maybe verbiage. The treasurer's brought up some good points, and we'll want to read RFPs so we know what's out on the street, and let's stay in touch on that. Committee, back to our staff, I would say, let's look forward to getting together at the end of August, and that will be set as soon as Ryan and others can figure out whether or not we can visit our University of Wyoming or set up the tours offered by Suzanne. So the co-chairman and I will be in touch with each other and follow out with some information on that next meeting. Does that sound appropriate, Wendy?
Sounds great, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're nearing the end of the agenda. Is there anything else for the good of the cause? Really have appreciated this morning all, and look forward to working with every one of you. And hopefully we can do that in person at the end of August. Madam Co-Chairman, any final thoughts? Okay. Everyone have a great day. We